The Washington Post reports a grim story about a silent health crisis among men that is shortening their lifespans. Although research on sex-specific health issues often focuses on women and gender minorities, data reveal a global longevity gap between men and women, and this gap is widening. In the US, women's life expectancy is 79.1 years, while men's is just 73.2 years. In every aspect of life, men seem to have the advantage, yet their health outcomes are worse than women's. This crisis has implications for all members of families. Men are more vulnerable to parasitic infections and die at higher rates from diabetes, COVID-19, and cancer than women. Men's death rates are higher across all age groups, including for suicide, car accidents, and pedestrian deaths. Biases about masculinity and the stigma around admitting to health issues are also factors in this crisis. It was a silent crisis that had been brewing for years, a crisis that had gone unnoticed and ignored. It was a crisis in men's health that was shortening the lifespans of fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons. The conventional wisdom had always been that a lack of sex-specific health research mainly hurt women and gender minorities. But as the years passed, it became apparent that this was not the case. Across the lifespan, from infancy to the teen years, midlife, and old age, the risk of death at every age was higher for boys and men than for girls and women. The result was a growing longevity gap between men and women. In the United States, life expectancy in 2021 was 79.1 years for women and 73.2 years for men. That 5.9-year difference was the largest gap in a quarter century. But the data did not tell the full story. The gap between men and women was a global phenomenon, although sex differences and data on the ages of greatest risk varied around the world and were influenced by cultural norms, record-keeping, and geopolitical factors such as war, climate change, and poverty. For boys and men in the United States, the health risks were stark. Men were at a greater risk of dying from COVID-19 than women, a gap that could not be explained by rates of infection or pre-existing conditions. The age-adjusted death rate for COVID was 140 deaths per 100,000 for males and 87.7 per 100,000 for females. More men died of diabetes than women. The death rates for men were 31.2 per 100,000 people versus 19.5 per 100,000 for women. The cancer mortality rate was higher among men, with 189.5 per 100,000 compared with 135.7 per 100,000 for women. Black men had the highest cancer death rate at 227.3 per 100,000. Among black women, the cancer mortality rate was 149 per 100,000. The mortality rates for boys and teens ages 10 to 19, 44.5 per 100,000, far outpaced that for girls, 21.3 per 100,000. Even among infants, the mortality rate was higher for boys, 5.87 per 1,000 live births, versus girls, 4.95 per 1,000. Men died by suicide nearly 4 times more often than women, based on 2020 data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The rate of suicide was highest in middle-aged white men, but teen boys also faced a high risk. In 2020, 72% of all motor vehicle crash death victims were male. Men also accounted for 71% of pedestrian deaths, 87% of bicyclist deaths, and 92% of motorcyclist deaths. The statistics were bleak, and advocates for more research into men's health say the goal was not to steal resources from women, girls, and gender minorities. But by viewing men as the privileged default, health experts were ignoring important sex differences that could illuminate health issues across gender and minority groups. For years, the widely held belief in medical circles was that women used too many healthcare resources compared to men. As a result, men were viewed as the standard for seeking healthcare, while women were often dismissed as hysterical or anxious when they sought care. "We used to think women were overutilizing healthcare, and men were doing it correctly," said Derek Griffith, director of Georgetown University's Center for Men's Health Equity in the Racial Justice Institute. "What we realized was that women were doing it better, mostly for preventive care, and men were actually underutilizing care." As the sun sets on the remnants of our once great civilization, we can only hope that future generations will learn from our mistakes and build a better world, one free from the greed and corruption that led us down this path to our dystopian future.